Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive, said author Howard Thurman. Welcome to the second season of the Vulnerable Power Show. Heart-to-heart, unscripted dialogues with world leaders who are shining examples of the unfolding leadership ascension. Hear from these creative leaders and visionary entrepreneurs who have traversed deep leadership transformations and inner alchemy, actualizing their vision for a better world. We share raw insights and practical tips so you too can transform painful experiences and old energies as fuel for your leadership growth and collective good. Join us and listen in so we can all bring hope, inspire transformation, uplift the world, and show what is possible through heart-centered, vulnerable leadership. As Margaret Mead, anthropologist, once said, "Never believe that a few caring people can't change the world. For indeed, that's all who ever have." Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the Vulnerable Power Show. An immersive experience, a deep dive, various things, a multi-dimensional experience to dive deep into the heart of leadership. Here we spotlight ascended leaders that are embodying this unfolding paradigm all around the world that have really received their soul's calling and are stepping forward to lead in various ways. Wherever you're at on your leadership journey, there will be golden nuggets in here for you, hoping to lace, as always, raw experiences with tools and tips and practical wisdom. So wherever you're at in your leadership journey, you too can take those steps forward with the intention to inspire you. You too can do it, to encourage you, show you how, and show you that it's possible, whatever is brewing within your soul, and to empower you with that practical knowledge as well. As always, I like to start off with how I met my guest and who we have with us. And so this beautiful soul sister, who's actually joining us on the eve of a birth date, a very special birth date. I met through a very powerful platform, and we had already known each other through a few different movements of consciousness and humans and business, etc. And she saw one of the first episodes of the second season with a mutual colleague and shared soul sister, Cordelia. And we connected on a deeper level, and it dropped in. And I said, wait a second, you should be on the show. And she was kind enough to send out her old books, which she's going to talk about her latest co-creation. And I got to say, once I remembered that we had connected, let me hold them properly. Let me Vanna White properly for the audience. Ta-da! And you could check out Laura, and we're going to hear all about her. Once I remembered that she had a Feng Shui background and she brings through a very integrative and holistic, what I consider a holistic approach, then I remembered. So it was very inspired, very synchronistic and unplanned and uncharacteristic of my old attorney nature. So without further ado, the birthday girl herself, Miss Laura Staley. Laura, welcome. Thank you for being here and being
thank
you.
Thank you, Haas. It's a joy to be here. A joy and delight.
A passionate joy, I presume.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, passionate joy. Yes, very much so. Woo!
Yeah, right. You're feeling the energy. A lot of people don't know the green room here on the Vulnerable Power Show, or the backstage. It's a virtual backstage. Before I hit record, I greet the guests and I do what I call an energetic priming, and I share some of my craft, and we open space and kind of weave intentional energies together. So oftentimes the people that appear on this show, they're a little bit more jazzed up or shifted in energy. So I can tell Laura is feeling the juju, as I call it. So it's a mutual honor to have you. And I don't like to waste time. We like to dive in because oftentimes we flow and go deep about your leadership journey. I know you've gone through a lot, and some people joining may already know of you and some may not. And I don't know much about your journey. I skimmed the book. So this is going to be one of those episodes where it's going to be really raw for me too. So why don't you take us through what I call the transformational journey, your leadership journey, before we get to what you do now and how you do what you do now. What was Laura like before? More of that, I call it the before and after. What's the before Laura, right?
Okay. Oh man. So before Laura was terrified and traumatized. I grew up inside a household where the dynamics were very difficult. My own mother suffered from her own challenges, and as this kind of scapegoated child, but I was like, wow, what is this? And so I became passionate about being kind and being perfect. And, if I just get straight A's and trophies in swimming, and, so there was this ambitious little driver in there going, okay, I've got to perfect, perform, and produce, right? And maybe then when I have all these things, I'll get loved, right? Because it was in the hot pursuit of being loved, especially by my family, quite frankly, right? By my dad, by definitely my mom. And what I discovered on that journey, well, and then some other things, difficult things happened outside of that household. Of course they did, right? Because that's like, wow, okay. So at school, the bullies at school, and then, sexual abuse that happened when I was really little, threatened for my life, me and my best friend. It's really scary stuff, right?
And this happened on campus?
I'm like, wow, sorry?
And this happened on campus from what you're alluding to? So the sexual trauma experiences were
right. Well, it happened at my nursery school. And it was just like, wow. But of course, nobody, and the silence, right? The silence is worse. So even when I said the bad man took my clothes, nobody, it was like, there's no bad man at your school and blah, blah, blah. And so I buried it, right? Because that, what else do you do? And as I went along, the driver continued, right? Because I took the talking papers or the walking papers, right? The expectations of other people seriously. And adopted what they thought I should do with my life so I earned a BA, I earned an MA, I earned a Ph.D. I taught for 5 years at my alma mater, which I'm really proud of those accomplishments.
Wait, you have a doctorate?
I do.
I'm going to learn as we unpack. What's your, the guests who have joined in, the guests that have joined in.
And you don't have to call me Dr. Staley. It's really okay.
Well, hold on. Yeah, this is good because we get to unpack, and as the guests that join in regularly, if you're new, I love to pepper in and kind of dissect. So what was your PhD in before you continue on your journey? And I appreciate the candor.
Oh, absolutely. It was in political science of all things.
I didn't know that about you. Okay, that's fascinating. So I did law and I did poli-sci almost. So okay, I didn't.
Right. I know.
Okay, keep going. Okay, my curiosity peaked. I'm sorry.
Right.
Keep going.
And like I guess I have a passion for our democracy, and I steeped myself in all of that world. Have since learned that there were big gaps even in my graduate level education, interestingly enough. There's this thing called voter suppression, but we won't go down that cheese hole today. I mostly, because people might say, well, why don't you want to be addressed as Dr. Staley? And I think it's because I've integrated that, and I want people to connect with me from my heart, from the wisdoms I've gleaned along the way. And sometimes that comes with kind of like this, ooh, she's really smart, and somehow I'm above or below or right. And I'm not about that, because I want to I love meeting people where they are, and I have such curiosity about who people are. So I then get married, divorce, and then I get married again. I have kids. And when I got pregnant with my daughter, Haas, I was like, okay, game over with this whole academic thing. It's just, I had always wanted to be a mom. It was a soul calling. It was a soul expression. And it happened, interestingly enough, talk about leadership, right? Because sometimes leadership looks like making a choice that defies everything that's going on around me, which included choosing to be a full-time mom at a time when pretty much every woman I knew was like, what's up with that? Are you from the 1950s? And I'm like, well, maybe, and yet I knew in my soul that I wanted to have this experience. And I was grateful for the kid's dad, at the time that he was aligned, and we were very conventional in that sense, in that, you know, he went off and earned a good income and allowed me to be a full-time mom, which I treasure to this very moment, because I had to break the cycle, given right what I've just sort of described about my past. And I knew enough, right? All that curiosity, all that education, I knew that I needed to break the cycle. I knew enough about abuse and trauma and kind of what I had lived through to go, wait, I get to be a whole different kind of mother to my own children, and really drop into my heart and do this passionately, with a great deal of consciousness and awareness, and a great deal of wisdom of what I had already gleaned. And yet, of course, then I'm with 2 little kids, and I've clearly got PTSD. You know, I'm acting badly. I'm blowing up around them. You know, my son would, you know, play with his little matchbox. You know, we always knew mom had a bad day because he'd be saying the F word with his little matchbox cars the next day. We laugh about it now, but please know that I was just like, oh, this is not okay. So and
let's pause.
Yeah,
so this is really potent on many levels. And as you've seen in some of the episodes, because I know you've caught some of the episodes, I like to slow down, both for the audience's sake and because there's so much wisdom that can be gleaned in already what you said. And oftentimes I marvel at how quickly we unpack so many things. So let's a couple of things that I've taken notes on that really, I think, speak to the theme of the show, dovetail a lot of amazing things that we've evolved on the show. So this pursuit of being loved, this notion of silence around abuse or burying the trauma, totally can relate to that. We've touched upon it in the show this season a little bit. This notion of taking expectations from others personally in terms of identifying or adopting your identity from the outside world. Before we get to the PTSD, which it sounds like carried over from the childhood trauma, is that accurate? And the familial, the epigenetics. Okay, so real quick, because we're touching on inner child stuff, which I haven't really covered on the show. We've talked about motherhood. We're going to talk about fatherhood in an episode after this with Paul Zelzer, which came out organically when Paul mentioned fatherhood. So let's talk about the child for a second, which I know you and I had talked about when we had a quick chat a few weeks ago. And not so much your children per se. What was your experience in terms of understanding? Because I know we're at this point where you're starting to understand, oh, shoot, there's a problem. My child is now I'm passing forward. I'm projecting onto the child my anger, my frustration. They're embodying it in this matchbox thing you're describing. How would you describe to the audience that is new to inner child work or new to the notion of our inner child? Because I think you have a lot of understanding and personal experience with this. So it's coming out very organic. So that's what I want to pause on first, is this inner child concept that keeps pinging in my head from what you're describing. And I know it's near and dear to you with your own children, which we're going to talk about. So talk to me about that if it's okay. And I do appreciate you being candid, Laura.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, clearly everyone's a mirror. And so at this juncture, my children became mirrors for my unresolved traumas, right? And so I sought out professionals, because I knew, you know, my then husband came to me and was like, you're terrifying me a little bit, but definitely the kids. And I really didn't want to do that. And
was it anger? What were your symptoms?
Oh yeah, it was anger, you know, and I was just blowing up. I wasn't calling them names. Like, I think I knew enough not to like berate them or call them names, but I was just like, I was like a cartoon. Yeah, I was like a cartoon character after being out and about, long day, lots of stimulation. Who knows what came in? Because we now know that things come in sensory, right? That took me right back there to those experiences.
You mean the childhood experiences?
Yeah.
So you would relapse. So you would get triggered by what would come in throughout your work day. And then so let's unpack this. You would go back to these unresolved childhood traumas. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like kind of unconsciously. Like I would describe this character. I do describe it in Live Inspired as Lois. I gave her a name. I was like, she was excuse my language, but I'm going to call her the psycho bitch from hell. And I witnessed her, because once he said that, and then I knew how this was not okay. Because the truth is, I knew only cowards behave that badly in front of their own little kids. And of course, this was all private, right? I wasn't doing this out in public. You know, like I was like this model mom, right? Or friends probably perceived me as incredibly kind. And not that I wasn't, I was, but I also had all this internal work and these inner children, if you will, that were furious. Let's just call them furious. And they were terrified. The truth is, I had such terror inside of me that I was trying to tamp down and hide. So I would call I've given my inner children, I call them inner children and inner teenagers, because in my case, there were like lots of different flavors. So there's the petulant Polly, and there's Priscilla Panties in the Wad, and there's terrified Tammy. And, terrified Tammy, things came in and she just would erupt. And because sometimes what we do with terror, and I could not do this as a child. Keep in mind, I went to freeze as a child, right? I was deer in the headlights. Most of the traumas that happened, I was deer in the headlights, but now I'm a grown woman and it's all coming out as rage, this inferno of rage. But it's really these unresolved traumas that were being held in place in my body, in my nervous system, in my thoughts, right? Of all of these inner children and these parts of myself, if you will. So for people who are not familiar with this, I would describe it as parts of yourself. Some people call it the shadow selves or the shadow self, but I say selves in my case, because things happened when I was 1, 2, 3. I mean, at every developmental age, I had trauma, which is just like, I have people who are like, how do you put sentences together, Laura? Yeah. So for me, it's the terrified infant who was burned on the top of my head, because that actually happened. I rolled into the pathway of a hot steam humidifier and screamed in my crib until my sister finally got my mom's attention. But it was too late in terms of the burn and then the scar that's still there to this day. So just as an example of like daily things that happen. So these inner children then are, and I was having night terrors. That was another access to these parts of me.
This is in adulthood you were having night
terrors? In adulthood.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I
had nightmares. I had nightmares as a child.
Yeah.
But now I'm having like night terror. And it's all pointing me to these young parts of myself who needed to heal. They needed my paying attention, first of all, to what they needed to say, how terrified they were, what they were actually terrified of, and to be working. Of course, thank God, I chose professional support. So by the way, for those who have the level of traumas that I did, I highly encourage, professionals, whoever you want to reach out to. And there's great trauma-informed stuff going on right now, Haas, which makes me so happy.
We're finally getting to the bottom of the collective.
Oh my gosh, because you can get in with one of those individuals and deconstruct. And it's not so much about reliving something. It's more about getting in the energy that got blocked. Because when you go to freeze, you're blocking that energy of the fight and the flight. So now the fight and the flight, if you will, or for sure the fight is coming out of me. This roaring like cartoon character, right? In front of my own little kids. And then I would be awash with shame, right? So there was shame, fear. I call it shame, fear, because to me, they were just collapsed together. And I had taken on the shame of other people, the perpetrator. The perpetrators who say it's your fault, right? The gaslighting that happens. And so as a little kid, I'm thinking, okay, I caused this horrible thing, and so I'm walking around with this silent shame that had to come out into the light of day. So, ashamed Ashley, there's another inner child. So I happen to give my inner children names that are often associated with emotional experiences. Stubborn, petulant, jealous, I have, like jealous Judy. And but it helped me so much, Haas, to give them voice.
Exactly.
And to say, okay, what are you jealous of? What is the experience that you're wanting to have that you're not having? What's in the gap? Mm-hmm. And then to find that agency to start making different choices. And part of the work that I did, with the guidance of brilliant professionals, is I started to clip the wire. So I started to notice my body, because here, this is the other part for me, is I was walking around like a bobblehead. Like I could describe her, I could say, oh yeah, I have this, and I'm ashamed, and la, 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 and yet it would still happen, mm-hmm. right? And I'd be like, wait, I want Lois to walk out of the building. I don't want to do this behavior in front of my kids, not for one more moment, right? So I had to drop into my body and start to go back and back and back, and start to identify those triggers as they came in those sensory ways. That's how they come in, mm-hmm. right? A smell, a scent. I'm at the mall. Maybe there was a scent of that perpetrator when I was 3 years old, the aftershave he wore. I mean, right? Because it's like, that's how it comes in, mm-hmm. and it triggers the brain. So to clip the wire and drop in my body, so as soon as I would notice my body start to go like this, mm-hmm. I was able to back it up, and with my kids, because I was still a full-time mom, right? I'm still in the heat of working through this. I would say, okay, kids, mom's got to take a break. And then I would go into my bedroom, close the door, and blow. I would just say all those words. And of course, I know it, but I didn't want to do that in front of them. And I know that there were times that they stood at that door crying because it scared them. They're little kids. Mm. They didn't know how to make sense of that. And yet, I'm pounding the pillows. I'm taking it out. And after, I don't know how many times it took me, but it was a process. This is not like a bullet. This isn't a silver bullet. This isn't, oh, take the pink pill and it's all gone. I had to be rigorous with myself and really pay attention to my body cues, so that I wasn't doing that awful behavior and interrupting it. Mm-hmm. And then I would cry, and then I would sit in my peace chair, what I dubbed my peace chair. Over many, many times of interrupting myself and pouring out all of those inner children's feelings, if you will, mm-hmm. in a safe way, with the pillows, with the bed, and people, and then I taught my kids, rip the recycling, when they got angry. It was like, anger isn't a bad, it's just what you do with it, right? The emotions aren't wrong. It's what we do with them. It's the behaviors that we do with the emotion, right? So I got to the point where I was able to go, guys, I got to take a peace break. And I would go and I would meditate in my peace chair. I no longer had to beat up the bed, because those inner kids had flowed out all the layers of rage that they had silenced and stuffed, and that I even as an adult, well, not anymore because I was coming out with my kids, but so, and it allowed me to get regulated, because it's about rhythm and emotional regulation. Exercise was a huge part of this. This is still a huge part of my life, about the healing, because I learned from Dr. Perry's book with Oprah Winfrey, What Happened to You, which I highly recommend to anybody who's had trauma. It's an outstanding book. I cannot recommend it. I mean, just go get a copy like today. But he talks about rhythm is regulating. So if somebody has once you identify that you're doing behaviors that are like, people are giving you feedback and they're like, yeah, I'm kind of scared of you. And then you feel that shame and, the whole, that's a clue, right? If people are brave enough to tell you the truth about how you're behaving, that's a gift. Because I was not committed to perpetuating that. I wanted immensely to break the cycle. And I did. I mean, the good news is I really, really did. And I continue to pay close attention to my body cue. I really worked with myself to deeply self-care as much as I possibly could as a full-time mom, you know, reach out and get that support from other people who could come, you know, be with my kids so I could take time and journal and cry and grieve, because grief is part of this too. I mean, I had to grieve a lost childhood. You know, when we hear Haas about other people that they're like, oh, you know, it was so happy. And I woke up in the morning and I would jump in the leaves and I would chase butterflies. And I'm like, what is that? And I'm not saying that I didn't have those moments in nature, because actually nature and being internal inside myself and with books, those three things, that was my trifecta, saved me. And the contrast of certain individuals who really genuinely loved me. So I had a grandma Hope. I love that her name is Hope. She's since passed a long time ago. And she, every time she showed up in my energy field, I felt loved like I had never been loved before. And you know that I just sat right next to her. She wasn't about, you know, sitting in her lap, because she often had sewing and crochet and things like that she was working on, needlepoint, or mending somebody's, or sewing a button on somebody's shirt. But I would sit so close to her, Haas, and to be hugged by her was just, you know, nourishment. And I've since looked back and recognized that installed something in the through line, right? Because in that contrast of having one person even who was willing to pierce through all that crud and love me exactly for who I was and who I wasn't, all the way up till I'm in graduate school when she passed away. And I'm grateful to this day. And the ways that my dad could love me, he loved me, right? So I have specific installments of moments of being seen, heard, and valued, and cherished even. Now, in my 20s, my dad, you know, definitely, you know, and I understand, have compassion for, he, you know, he had to throw me under the bus, and I get it. And I know, I'm not even looking back, I know that's language of a victim, but that in that moment, that was the experience. But I also understood, even at that moment, why he chose that, because it was such a triangulation, right? I'm like, I recognized that I was such a threat somehow to my mom. I don't know, I'd walk in the room and she'd, you know, and I had people say, well, she was jealous. I'm like, oh, okay, but okay, you know, but I have since rewired that and reframed it and gone, you know, all the gifts, the many, many treasures in this, because look at the life that I have now, Haas. I'm in this conversation with you on the eve of my birthday, and I'm filled with so much love and joy and compassion for all these inner kids, right? That now, you know, I shouldn't say if, when they show up, because they do, I'm human. They'll probably show up on my death day, right? And they'll be there going, yeah, how's she gonna handle this one? Right? And I'll be okay with that, because I now welcome them all into my heart, and I've been saturating them with so much love from my adult self, and assuring them that, you know, we're here now, we're not in that container, it's not that year. The mother, she's actually now dead, like literally, you know, doing her work on the other side.
Parenting.
Yeah, exactly. And I can be a mom, and I kind of see the books that I've put out there as loving mothers, you know, like I now have 6 loving mothers who keep birthing different versions of me. Because when I dip into this, I'm kind of like, wow, I wrote that, you know, And yes, I did, but it came from my heart and soul of who I was last year, which, the healing. Okay, the other thing is the healing just keeps cycling. And I'll give you a very specific example, Haas. Before I moved to North Carolina, my significant other and I, because I've alluded to the fact that the marriage ended, and that's a whole other story. But an important part of my trajectory and my growth as a leader. We're at a CarMax, and he's looking for a new car for the mountainous areas of North Carolina, because we came from Central Ohio. And I'm in the back seat. There's this young man car salesman. He's as kind and wise as he could be. He's informative, sharing, completely, utterly respectful. And I'm getting nauseous in the back seat and this is just like 3 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago, right? And all of a sudden it hits me. He's wearing the aftershave of the man who raped me when I was 19. Now, at that juncture, I had done a ton of work around what had happened at 19, right? And yet, here I was, nauseous and having to take care of myself and knowing that it had nothing to do with this young man. It was literally the sensory experience of that scent coming in. So how I handled it, because it downloaded, the memory, if you will, but I had all the tools and skills at this point to not just like flip out in the backseat of the cars that, the two of them are doing the test drive. But when we got back after that test drive, I just said, you know what, I'm good. I'm going to stand outside. I'm going to take really good care of myself. I took my significant other privately and just said, I'm feeling nauseous. I need to take care of myself. And later I told him what had actually happened. And I knew, and like I had all the tools on board, Haas, to know that I was in the year that I was in, whatever, 3-4 years ago was, right? And I wasn't the 19-year-old. But this is the unraveling and the cycling, because I'm touching it lighter now, right? I'm not back actually in the experience, but that scent is coming in. And so I'm touching on that experience from the deeper wisdom, all the learnings, all the unraveling of those inner children and inner teenagers, right? The inner 19-year-old, because I'm not 19 now. I wasn't 19 3 years ago. And being able to see it and hold space for it, but not engage with it. I could bear witness. I could hold space and take really good care of myself. And even, and it's interesting because even as I'm describing it right now, right, I have a moment of just grieving what had happened. Because when you drop underneath kind of the fight, flight, freeze, there's grief. And I know I mentioned that earlier. And I now know that when things come in, I often just take a moment to flow through the grief, because emotions are energy in motion. And when I can keep my heart open, right? Because even in that experience, right, I had my heart really open. It was a great day. I was excited for my significant other to, make this car purchase or find the right car that he wanted to have, for North Carolina, and did not behave in a way that would take anything away from his beautiful experience of, interacting with this kind young car salesman, right? And he woke up in the morning and he didn't say, gosh, there's going to be a customer today who my aftershave is going to trigger their rape memory. Like, nobody does that, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning. I hope that most humans don't wake up in the morning going, ooh, today's the day that I'm just going to set off all kinds of in the world, right? You know, and so but it is that deep inner work to have that self-awareness and have discovered these things about what happened to me, so that I wasn't recapitulating old react.
Well, it goes back to, so let's unpack this. Beautiful, very
Yeah.
raw flow. So thank you.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that if we can. So we have this
absolutely.
notion of, there's a lot there. So for the audience, and thank you for the raw dive in. So, you know, you said your mirrors for unresolved traumas. So a couple of things for the audience, if you're new to any of these concepts, you may want to check out how stones work around voice dialogue. There's books on subpersonalities, the topic of psychosynthesis. Now, you find this in modern psychotherapy and modern psychology. You also find it in ancient indigenous traditions and ancient mystical traditions and wisdom, this notion of the inner children and this notion of that we're made up, our consciousness is made up of sub-energy. So this isn't to say that we have different personalities or we're schizoidal. So let's be clear on that. So if you're new to these topics, that's what we're talking about on a very broad level. Then Laura very brilliantly is showing us the garbage in, garbage out, as I call it, that your vessel can take on energies. And if you bury them, if you suppress them, and your story, Laura, matches mine as a leader, having suppressed rage, having a fragmented notion of the self, searching outside of ourselves, a lot of beautiful themes that you've unpacked in the first 20, 25 minutes of this flow. And so what you also show us is this alchemy, is that you have to regroove the energy, and that it takes it lighter and lighter and lighter, or you get to the residue quicker and quicker. And you illustrate and embody and demonstrate live containment, right? This notion that your body, you have to be able to hold and be individuated. And there's a lot of different ways we can approach it. In some of the other episodes, we've talked about it through the lens of quantum mechanics, consciousness. So I love how you really very brilliantly, without meaning to, organically, or demonstrating live, because as these emotions come up, you're showing us and showing the audience what the containment looks like. And I love how you addressed something that's really interesting, terror and trauma. And we're dancing around something that, as you put it, a lot more practitioners out there. I have a lot of respect for one in particular. There's a lot of great practitioners. Somebody that's been out there doing it for a while, if the audience is interested. Irene Lyon, I may have mentioned her on another episode in the past, I don't recall. Irene, Irene, Lyon, check out her work. Because there's a lot of beautiful leaders like Irene and others. And Laura, you mentioned the industry and that, because we're now talking about collective trauma. And you touched on the central nervous system. So a lot. I mean, I can go on and on. There's so much depth and multidimensionality. And thank you for alluding to that. You need to be able, I like Michael Singer's description in Untethered Soul, what you talked about towards that tail end of this first flow, that you need to be able to step back as the observer and still have the human experience, which is another way of saying containment. That again, you guys and gals see it live. What Laura was doing is these emotions brew up for her. And as you said, it took effort, took mastery, it took training, it took, discipline or devotion, your words, or I believe dedication. So I love that. So really interesting earlier too, that you dovetailed on something that Cordelia, who was one of the impetuses for us, bringing you on the show. You talk about leadership as making the choices that defy everything around you. I literally talked to, and I loved how you started with motherhood and you wanted to be a mother. I was talking to a co-creator within the last 24 hours on this very issue. And we have touched this on other episodes. So it's not motherhood as leadership. This is this phrase that you use, that leadership is making choices that defy everything around you. And I love how you went against the grain, because I sense a lot of the listeners may have to do it in the other direction. They may be in motherhood and wanting to do the PhD, and then they may be like, oh, I'm a bad person for leaving my children to going and pursuing. So I love how you said that you said leadership is making a choice that defies everything around you. Or as I've learned, true leadership is controversial. It's paving a new way. So I love how the irony of your experience was, here you were where everybody wants to be as a mother. Like, I really wish I could pursue my calling. And then you're like, my calling in this life is to have the kids. So I wanted to flush that out because I think it's something that's oftentimes missed. You can't be a conformist and be a leader.
Oh gosh,
and it's going to be tough. Yeah.
Oh, and it's a lonely, and you're gonna, and I angered people, got a lot of judgment. What are you doing with your degree? Oh, and I remember the day that I cleared out all those papers. I kept the book by John Stuart Mill on liberty, and I think that was,
the poli-sci book? You kept it on liberty. I have that book.
I know, right? Oh my God, high five. Yeah, right. It just, and not that those questions still don't intrigue me. What makes a good human being? What creates a civil society? All of that. And yet I knew. And here was another defying moment is I had a home birth, right?
You did it old school. Oh boy.
Stretching forward, and I got the articles, and the fear, and actually it was a really great moment for me in kind of standing up for myself, because my as you can imagine, my mother was absolutely freaking out, and I just said to her, "You're scared," and I'm not. I was doing all the research. I had a super healthy pregnancy, and then I had a beautiful birth of my son, and I had the contrast of I had a beautiful birth with my daughter, happened to be in the context of a hospital, and I just saw all the out of integrities. They laughed at my birth plan. A nurse told me that the nurses sat around and laughed at ladies' birth plans rather than actually honoring them. I was like, wow, it was so candid of her, right? But she cared about me, but it opened the door for this other experience. So I had a contrasting experience.
Would you say that?
And again, it defied, right, the culture and all the la 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 la. And yet, for me, with the support of the midwives, I had a beautiful birth. I had a plan B if anything came up. I knew exactly the doctor I would go to. I knew the hospital I would go to. I had called to, talk about informing yourself and educating and feeling like you've got agency, right?
Well, hold on.
Voice and power. Oh my God, that's so empowering.
Well, hold that, because that's, yes, on a 3D, let's call that a 3D level. What I wanted to interrupt and point out, and I think this is something that is oftentimes missed, because you said this notion of terror, right? And you know this, and for the audience's sake, you have to choose your state of frequency, because you talk about agency. Let's take it another level. It's your state of beingness, your frequency, your emotional state, however you want to couch that. It sounds to me like you got out of fear or terror as you started to heal. And I know at that point in your pregnancy journey, you weren't fully healed. What I'm saying is, it sounds like your belief, this is what I wanted to say, your belief allowed it also. Yes, the planning, yes, the agency, yes, the informed consent, the placebo impact or the intentional energy that you put into it. Would you say that contributed, that your belief had to be there, your faith had to be there?
100%. Like, I think deep in my soul, I knew I could do it.
So, okay, what about those?
I don't know how that, and even now, even on a daily basis, when stuff, if you will, downloads, that's what I call it, like downloads. I go with it, because it's a love inspired idea, and love has never, ever let me wrong.
Again, let's pause, because I'm taking you down a rabbit hole on purpose, because you talk about this lonely path. You talk about, okay, you have to defy the odds. What if somebody's listening right now, because I have listeners from all ranges of this leadership journey, and let's say they're not a master like you and I. By master, I mean they don't have the wherewithal to contain, to catch, to regroove, to alchemize, inner work, however you want to couch it, the transformational stuff inside that then translates to changes and shifts practically outside and increasing your impact. What if they don't have that belief? So they're dealing with defying the odds and they have all of this external, you're crazy, they're feeling lonely. What would you say to the audience for strengthening belief or inspiring that belief and igniting that belief? Because I would say you have an old soul, as we've talked about, when we first dive deep. Yeah. So many people may associate with that, say, I have an old soul, only I don't believe it as much. Can you give us experiences along with this pregnancy thing on your journey to unpack that? Because I think the loneliness for me was hard enough. The holy cow, everybody thinks I'm going to, I'm defying the odds. I'm a thought leader. I'm crazy. Let's put it that way. Right. And then I also doubted myself given this inner trauma that I experienced, given this fragmentation and soul work I had to do. So let's touch on that element of belief. What can you tell us and in terms of empowering, encouraging that belief?
Yeah, well, I guess for me, it was what I came to connect with, because I was doing a lot of reading in the metaphysical at the time. And for me, it was connecting to that still small voice within, and doing that even before I had done the full-on body work of, clipping the wire once my kids both were little. I still was willing to listen to the soft, Mary Oliver puts it so beautifully. Let the soft animal of your body love what it loves.
So you engage,
right?
Your impulses.
And I think I engaged, because here's the other thing that I would say about this is sometimes the body has to move. You talked about moving and movement earlier, right? Yeah. Sometimes the body just gets to move in the direction that you want to take your life, and then the mind will learn. So the body moves first. You take this brave step, kind of in that, whoa, I don't know. I know I'm lonely and doubting, but wow, I haven't done this. I haven't taken this, even if it's a micro movement, this tiny step. It begins to have the mind go, wait a minute. It can even be something as simple, if you're right-handed, do some things left-handed. It brings you to presence in the body. You're holding the toothbrush, and I'm doing this purposely because I'm right-handed, but you're holding and all of a sudden you're like, wow, how you're noticing, I will notice how my hand feels, and it brings me right into the moment. It's this tiny shift that you make to do something just a little bit different. That's not scary. Brushing my teeth in the privacy of my bathroom with my left hand is not scary. It's not. It's awkward. Right? I can't. Oh, did I get all my teeth? Right? Or in the shower, if I go top to bottom, starting at the bottom and going to the top, it's like, wow, you get this whole shift in who you are, and it softens and it helps dissipate the prior belief that I'm a worthless, blah, 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 or I'm not capable, blah, 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 or I'm incompetent, blah, blah, blah. And in the body experience, you go, whoa, I did that. I did that. What else could I do? And then it opens the door to the curiosity. And of course, curiosity. So you might go from lonely and kind of confused and, oh my God, the voices are coming in and going, you should do this and you should do that, and la, 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 la. And even inside your mind, it's going, blah, 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 well, do this and do that. And so confusion isn't bad. It's just what is it? A train stop away from clarity. but to take that confusion and do something new in the body was what happened to be my way of getting at that faith and that belief that I could do what the soft animal of my body loved. That what was that? You know, was I courageous enough to even listen to the soft animal of my body? Right? Because it takes some courage to kind of go inside oneself, especially in our pinging, dinging, you know, social media, blah, 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 you know, everything coming at us, to go internally and go, wow, what do I want here? What is my still soft voice saying to me? What is my inner guidance guiding me to? What can I just drop into my heart? Can I even just put my hands over my heart and close my eyes and listen to what its guidance is? So I love playing with that idea of doing things just a little bit different, right? Because we can get so habituated, right? We get up and we do our routines, you know.
Well, and I like this because you're real quick. So it's a lot of another deep transmission. So if you haven't seen the first season, check out Tanya Seagrave's episode, because what you're echoing, you talked about earlier, only you talked about it with the inner energies or the inner children. You're echoing it seems like similarly with the body, which is everything is energy. So whether the energy shows up as your inner child's voice or your body wanting to move, it seems like you A, still, B, you acknowledge, or you actually honor it and hold space like your grandma held space for you. And then you allow the energy's natural unfolding. You don't try to take it in a direction that's unnatural, which takes us back to healing, regulation, harmony is what regulation is. So if you want, you can check out the first season. There's several episodes on body trauma healing. So now we're diving into this notion of emotional healing, leadership transformation. And then we stumbled upon this topic of broadening our view and our perspective, because what you talk about is taking this shift, doing the toothbrush in a different way, not only helps you regroove your physical trauma, which is brilliant as you brought out, changes your perspective. So let's go down this real quick, this notion of broadening our view and our perspective as leaders. And because you show a couple of techniques that not only can help with the belief, encouraging to listen to the voice, all sorts of brilliant wisdom and practical tools in there. We also touched upon this before we hit record, this notion of unhurried curiosity. And it seems like you unpacked that organically as well, this notion of doing this toothbrush thing and doing these various techniques or tips that you dropped in can also allow us to then expand our consciousness field or expand or broaden our view in our perspective. So talk to us about that and how that helped you, because and then we'll keep going back to your journey and then where you're at now. So let's dovetail some of these other things in.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think not being so grippy, and I'm going to language it this way, around the ego personalities, you know, wanting to, you know, pursue pleasure and, you know, the craving and then the resisting, right? And being battered around by that.
The pusher and pleaser.
Right. But to hold space. And when one does that in the space of kind of sitting in what I used to call this my inner fly on the wall. It's so cool that the evolution, right? Because all of a sudden the idea of we have that expression, or at least in this culture, we have the expression of an inner fly on the wall, which is, oh, I wish I could be an inner fly on the wall at that party, meaning you want to stand and just observe everything that goes around. Does Sally talk to Fred, and does Fred do this, and what happens at this party? But I'm going to be kind of a wallflower observer of what goes down, and then taking it on to be that observer of my own what's coming out of my mouth, being able to hear what's actually coming out of my mouth, that I've got my hand held this way, I've got a finger, like I'm aware, right?
A whole nother level of presence.
Right? Yeah. And there's like this awareness of exactly what I'm doing. And then if I'm not coming at this moment with some kind of craving or resisting, I can be with you. I can be curious about what's happening for Haas. I can be present with you, and it expands my ability to take the whole of you in, even as I take the whole of myself in, right? So now I'm hearing what I'm saying. I know what I'm doing with my body here, right? I've got my hand behind my head. I know I'm doing that. I'm aware. And I can feel your energy through the Zoom. I see you, even as I'm staring at the dot, I see your head nodding, right? And I feel your smile. I saw your teeth, even in my peripheral vision. But if I'm so focused on what I'm going to call on an agenda, oh my God, I got to get something from Haas. I need something from him. I got to extract something. Wow, I don't know what it is, right? I mean, for me, I'm not aware of that. But a lot of human exchanges, people talk about transformational and transactional. Clearly, today we're having a transformational interaction. I mean, I'll be changed. I am, even as we're engaged right now, the cells of my being and body are alchemizing. A deeper level of healing. And even when I say that, I feel the chills coming right up my legs, which is so cool, right? Because I continue to broaden that view, and it allows a presence to take in the wholeness of a situation and the multifaceted dimensions of another human being. Because that thing, right? And maybe it looks like the inner child, I want a lollipop, isn't this Zoom thing done? I want to go get ice cream. It's your birthday tomorrow, or whatever, right? I go, okay, thank you for sharing. And no, right, not right now, but maybe later.
Have you done Vipassana meditation?
No, I haven't.
So you broke down an ancient Buddhist teaching and mystical science right there very brilliantly, and then astutely point out the performance benefits, because you're talking about the cognitive function, because as you zoom out, then you can take in more data. So we're talking all sorts of different benefits as a leader, and I didn't think you were going to take us down this avenue, so that's brilliant. And so you haven't done Vipassana. So there you go. So you're, like I keep saying, you're an ancient soul. Okay. So let me ask another question, which I've been meaning to ask, which goes back, and I know I bounce around the audience who's regular may be used to that. For the new ones, so I assure you, we'll tie it all with a bow at the end. If we already haven't started to. You talk about this, and I mentioned it briefly, collective trauma. And I've mentioned a couple of colleagues out there that I admire in other episodes about the work they're doing in collective trauma. You talked about this really briefly. I don't want to go too deep into it, because I want to continue on what you're doing now and how, you've unburied your treasures, or the box in the back of your proverbial closet. What about this silence around abuse? What was your personal experience? Because it sounds like your dad throwing you under the bus, if my hunch is correct, was correlated to this. Because I don't think this buried trauma thing, it's not only your family. I can speak to my family, many families, society as a whole, our whole globe as a whole has so much buried trauma swept under the rug. And then there's this notion of, don't talk about that for various reasons. Shame, they're going to think we're crazy, or, so there's various reasons for the denial. And I honor it all. I'm not saying there's anything wrong or right. I'm wondering, from your personal experience, having chosen to create a curriculum where you experience deep, deep abuse and pain and rape and all that, what is it from all of that you've learned that you can share with those that choose to still sit in silence? because there may still be people that are like on this, no, never, even if it's good for us, never. What can you share with what healing and alchemy you've seen in your family constellation? Because I know that your parents have moved on. I've done this work. We've talked about it a brief bit. I mentioned it on the episode with Cordelia, the inner work I've done around my mother. And so, yeah, and I know it's a raw subject, and I know you're comfortable going down these avenues. Yeah, talk to us about that. Silence around collective abuse.
Oh God. So silence in many ways, and I've heard this and it's so resonated. I watched the documentary Cracked Up.
I'm not familiar. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going.
It's a gentleman who is actually famous, SNL. I'm not going to remember his name.
Oh, okay.
But and God bless him, because he tells in documentary style, in interviews with other people, right, of this whole breaking the silence of what happened to him, right? And then the experts coming in and talking about the silence, and even he says it, the silence in some ways is worse than what happened to you.
100%, yes. It's indignifying.
It does not allow for the healing.
Yes.
So my own experience is it was just kind of like a flatlining. And even in the moments I did speak for a split second, my truth, it got denied. I got blamed. It was your fault. It's you. and if you really did say that, so-and-so, you'll get killed, or so-and-so will get fired, or, all kinds of things, right? Oh my gosh. So the silence mutes in the collective, mutes joy, mutes, it's like this big, heavy blanket, muting joy, muting passion, muting love, muting grief. And then like the one emotion that seems to come out in the collective is what I've observed, and even for me, right, was this rage. And vengeance. Isn't, yeah, and rage and vengeance isn't silent. But it also perpetuates the mess.
Well, it deafens. Let's add that. It deafens it, right? So it's so loud that it still doesn't alchemize the core cause, which is we're all grieving. We're all in this together. So I could speak to my family. The suicide of my brother, nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to bring it up. And it sat there like a weight. And you describe it so brilliantly that I moved. And so, yeah, I totally can speak firsthand. And I know some of the listeners, if not all of the listeners, can say, yep, I've either experienced this, seen this. It's, then you get vengeance. And we saw it in the Me Too movement. You saw so much vengeance come out that it's still, I don't think we've addressed the core systemic problem. Nope, still there.
Yeah. Because to me, the core of that is it's an agenda. Well, let's just take the immediate. It's me being objectified. All of a sudden, I become parts. I'm not a little girl, a whole human being. Developmentally, where I am on my developmental trajectory, I have become an object for another human being to, if you will, implement their agenda.
So you're double objectified. You're objectified then you're objectified again. Yeah, that's an interesting
right. And then the silence, back to the silence, then suppresses everything, like everything else. So the perpetrator can't heal, and I can't heal. So the breaking the silence of what actually happened and being willing to be a truth teller allows for the healing to take place. So in my own personal story, My dad, I broke ties with my family of origin. They were so confused. I mean, I was super clear. My sister happened to believe I needed to be punished. We've since reconciled. I mean, that's the breakthrough, right? The beauty of this. There's such kindness. There's forgiveness on my part and love. She owned her mean behavior, but I understand it and have compassion because she was a little kid inside of the system, and she was just she was mimicking my mother. What else did she have, right?
Modeling behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
More hurt people, hurting people. Keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I wrote this letter and I thought, okay, I might get gaslit, I might get fierce blowback, but I get this note from my dad saying, I just want to understand why you've gone silent with us. And so I told my truth. I said there was a abuse that persisted into my adulthood on behalf of my mother. This is what it looked like to me. I had I had books and resources that I gave him, and I said I had to save my own life. And I quoted The Journey by Mary Oliver, because that poem, Haas, gave me so much permission to walk away. And it's brave for a woman to do that, because we are trained to stay connected to the death. Stay connected to perpetrators, stay connected to family who is abusing us in that, if you will, that codependency. And here I am, a woman, again, defying the training, but willing to speak my truth and break my silence to my dad. And all I can say is, in my 10-year absence from my family of origin, my sister absolutely saw and began her work. I don't think that would have happened had I not removed myself.
The dominoes.
Sent that, right? And sent that letter. Because then I get this beautiful letter from her at Christmas time, 2 years ago? I mean, recently. And it was after my mom had passed, and she cleared out our parents' home, bless her heart for doing that diligent and hard work. Because I completely pieced out. I was not there for the death of my dad. I was not present for the death of my mom, but my siblings were, and I thanked them profusely for their courage to stand in the fire of that experience. But I knew I had to send my compassion from far away in North Carolina. But I get this beautiful acknowledgement, and she was the first person of my entire childhood experience who stepped up and said, everything that you said happened actually happened. And not like all the stories are, trauma drama. There's a lot of wisdom actually in this book. Right. And
I already did the Vanna White thing. You did it again.
Right.
You double Vanna Whited.
I couldn't help but, because it's like, oh my God. And I wept and wept and wept, because being seen and validated for what actually happened, and her apology for the ways in which she was mean to me, was just a watershed moment. And it's the kind of thing that I wish could happen in the collective. So the more that this happens individually, where somebody's brave enough to say, this stuff went down, right? And it reminds me of the scene back to Cracked Up, when the best friend is just stunned, because the best friend of the man that the documentary is about is just like, I had this experience of your parents, and now I'm hearing this truth from you that I can hardly be with, right? So he's like having cognitive dissonance, right? Like, how do I hold what I think is this real experience of joyful, kind, your parents, right? And how do I hold that at the same time I now know this content of your mother's horrific abuse of you? And yet he believed him, was part of it. And he literally believed him, which was a huge moment for this one. Like, we've been best friends. I have no reason not to believe that what you're saying about your own mother is actually true, even as I over here would walk into your family home and have my lovely experience of your parents. And because it's just like, oh, and I remember again, just that moment for me, and having this letter from my sister, you know, where she was just like, it was true, you know, because there was a period of time that I really did think I was the crazy one. It must be me. It's my fault. You know, my mom, you know, I wanted to adopt whatever, you know, oh, your mom's so loving and she's kind and look at all the children. It's just,
maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe
yeah,
I got it wrong.
Maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And the thing that I've come to realize is somebody can have that loving experience of my mother, and I believe them. I don't discount their experience. But I hope, and I know it's difficult because this is part of the collective trauma thing, right? That they can hear pieces of my truth too, because my truth coexists with their experience. So my experiences and their experiences have to, they, you know, they've got, you know, like there's got to be some kind of moment, you know, and the best that so far that my brother's been able to do, because he was split all good, is to say we had very different experiences, Laura, and we both cried. We both cried. And I know my brother loves me, and I love my brother. I love him, you know. I mean, we were actually really close. I was older, and so I was kind of his protector. You know, if she was going to drag in me, okay, you know, and if in the moments that I could tell that she was going to drag in him, I was like, and what I mean by that is rage at him or whatever, right? He's being a kid, right? And I would just step into the fire and he'd run out of the room. And I was like, okay, I'll be a lightning rod. You know, here I am. Just, I'll take it on.
Well, that's beautiful, because that's a good way to say what, you know, to put, I guess you could say, some summation on that statement, right? Right there is, that's what a leader is at times, is that permission slip. And so there's a lot there, right? That, again, brilliant, because you have, what I wrote down and what I wrote is, you know, this silence around collective abuse or individual abuse not only stifles the life that you talked about, these elements, it stifles the healing. So if your intention is to actually heal, and I'm reminded of my master's from Pepperdine, from dispute resolution, and a lot of conflict resolution theory was vindicated and was validated by apartheid and what happened in South Africa, and the tribunals that came out is what comes to mind, because all they did is they held a container, a space for people to tell their story. And in doing so, nobody was blamed. Unlike Nuremberg, there were no trial. Nobody was blamed. And all that happened is enormous amounts of, you can call it healing, I call it alchemy, which is old energy is potently transformed, and then huge, I mean, you want a nuclear reaction? Do deep freaking healing work and see the awesome energy that is released from that space. And so I love how you bring that up, because that's very much what I know from conflict resolution, which is, you know, one of my backgrounds and one of the things I do in this line of work. So this is interesting, because the other thing that you said that came to mind is this: you didn't know the chain reaction, because sometimes we think to really help those around us, we need to stay and change our family or our friends or our community. And that's the painstaking journey that I kind of didn't realize I would be ahead of the curve on, because I left society a few years ago. And in doing so, and even recently, to some people we both know, I had to walk away from. And now I'm seeing the reverberations like you articulate. Sometimes in that walking away, we plant seeds. And to be bold enough not to look back, cherish, as you talk about a lot in Cherishing Your World. See, you don't need to do the Vanna White. I got you, girl. Okay. I'm already like Vanna Whiting minus the new one that I don't have. There is this notion, listen, if you want to be on the show and you want to mail me your books like she had the foresight to do, she didn't even know she was going to be on the show. And so I was like, oh, I get to You know, it may not do any justice for your old books because they see my face next to the book. It's not a sales tactic. It's like demotivating Pavlovian response. Like, I don't want to buy that book. Look at his face. I'm joking. I always do that self-deprecating. No, so back to this really potent thing. It's fascinating to me that happened for you too, because again, back to this premise of the show, it's flipping a lot of what you're saying, right? Even the whole mom PhD, it flips everything on its head. And I sense that's what this leadership paradigm is all about. So you did all this healing, motherhood transformed you, you do all that. Why the books? Why Feng Shui? Where did that come in to kind of bring us to the glowing, passionate joy of Laura Staley now? So we've heard all of this beautiful, we've seen it, we can feel it. You've brought all of you forward. So what was the cocoon, the metamorphosis on the other side? And then I think that takes us to, what are you doing now and why are you doing it?
Oh, that's beautiful. So we had a flood and lost a lot of belongings, and that opened the door to this beautiful body of wisdom that completely resonated with me. Well, at first I was intrigued. I didn't know what Feng Shui was, but
what is Feng Shui?
The
art, those that don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's the art and practice of arranging your physical space to enhance the quality of your life. For some people, their access point is decluttering, and literally, but I see it also as doing that in deep inner work. So you have a relationship with your belongings, and from one perspective, they're telling stories, right? We hold on to things, or we're constantly letting go of things, or somewhere in the middle, right? Acquiring things and then letting them go, and acquiring things that, you know. But all those belongings tell some kind of story about who you are, you know, emotionally, what's unresolved, and maybe even the limiting beliefs. And so then you can begin to do the deep dive, outer and inner work in relationship to your physical space and those things that you've brought into your physical space, because every aspect of your life, likely, unless you've taken it on, right, to do a lot of decluttering, is anchored in your physical space. It becomes another mirror, Haas. That's another way of seeing it. You know, like people and your relationships with people are mirrors for what's going on inside of you, but also your physical space is a mirror of the story of your life, right? Because many people can often, you know, turn to a painting or a photograph and tell the whole story about that photograph or that painting, right? So I have this flood, it opens the gateway to, oh my gosh, yes, I love being a mother, but what else is there? And I was introduced to the book, The Western Guide to Feng Shui, Room by Room by Tara Catherine Collins. I read it all the way on, because my then sister-in-law just said, oh, take it with you. You know, I'll get another copy. And I was so excited because it said, you know, live with belongings you love. And I'm like, it's stuff, what, you know, but I'm like slurping down this beautiful book. It's just, it's still to this day. I love this book so much. And it became the guide. You know, a couple of years later, I went ahead and did the 7-day training with the Western School of Feng Shui, got certified. It was the best homework, best training I've ever done in my life. Well, I've done other transformational trainings that were different, but you know, but this, I think it just was like, oh my gosh, I could so make. I kind of knew, but didn't know, and I had my doubts, right? Because I'm still doing this full-time parenting thing, right? But I was like, oh my God, I could so, you know, offer this, or you know, share the, and of course friends were like, oh, come to my house. And I'm like, oh yeah, we'll have the conversation and see what's happening in your space and how I can support you and having a really lovely physical space and a beautiful life, because they're talking to each other all the time. So then I created Cherish Your World in 2004, soon after I was certified, and then very part-time going forward. And then the marriage came to an end. The 22 marriage came to the end. The day, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back happened the day that I drove my daughter off to her first day of college. And my son had his challenges during this time too. But in the space of my singlehood, troubled son, you know, a whole other transformation and liberation took off. And I've always loved writing. I've always loved writing. I mean, it's kind of funny because even my mother, you know, for all the things and all the things, she often would say, "Oh, you got to write a book, Laura. You're just such a beautiful writer." You know, so she, interestingly enough, she was actually really supportive. I don't know if she'd care for the story, some of the stories that I wrote about her, but you know, I know.
Silent.
I know.
Don't tell anything about the trauma, honey.
I know, right? I know, right? Exactly. But you know, I'm grateful. So the writing in the wake of the marriage ending and all the stuff that was going down, I was like, now, because for years I had been saying to people, I'd be at these workshops and they're like, what do you want to do with your life? And I'd be like, a writer, I'll publish a book. And then they'd see me, you know, a week later and they're like, how's the book coming? I wasn't writing, you know? And I realized in order to be a writer, you actually have to write. But in the space of being freed from the marriage, where I gleaned so much wisdom about myself and, you know, the parenting of my kids and, you know, the basic, well, they're both now adults. I just, the channel has opened, Haas. And I have discovered, the words just keep coming to me and pouring out of me. And now even have, and maybe I already did this, but
Abundant Heart.
The latest one, Abundant Heart. Abundant Heart. It's poetry, prose, and some essays. And again, just kind of like this celebration of the post-traumatic wisdom that just keeps downloading. And I share it out there because I want so much for people to heal, to live passionate lives, to feel the love, to know that they're loved, to feel seen, heard, valued, cherished even. You know, because can, you know, like I realize sometimes there's loving somebody, but then there's cherishing somebody. And it just kind of like, you know, kind of takes it to a whole other level of deep acceptance, kind of hopefully how you would, you know, hold an infant, a newborn infant in your arms, you know, with that sense of awe and wonder and cherishing. You know, I would hope that for, you know, all infants, you know, being born today and children, and, you know, and breaking these, I think it's also, you know, like breaking the silence and helping the world transform in a very holistic way. I got this essay from an astrologer who talked about we are emerging from the dark age of materialism. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, that's so perfect with the Feng Shui piece, right? But I almost feel like, Haas, that with my own alchemy, right, that continues to happen even as we're talking, right? That there's something about the writing, the speaking, the sharing, these podcast interviews, the opportunity for the writing to go in different places, maybe even some fiction writing, right, where I have just that much more freedom in my expression, to expand that container. Feng Shui is a part of that, and I love the clients that I've worked with, and yet there's something really for me right now so juicy about creative expression. So for instance, I'm dancing every day on Facebook and posting those dances, and it's to raise money for different causes that are, you know, again, heart led. So this month it's for Prevent Child Abuse America. It's the oldest organization in our country, focused on transforming the quality of children's lives and family lives, and kind of actually giving people tools, right? And the knowledge to break maybe the cycles of things that they endured when they were children, so they don't have to keep perpetuating that, right? And I'm just so excited by that, because every day I go, I have no idea. And it's completely extemporaneous. I don't practice. I put on music, a song that just inspires me that day, and I move, and I love to dance. And who knew? I mean, if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be posting, because I was, you know, like, first of all, I was terrified of doing any of this. I was terrified of, a cell phone. I had friends going, no, you can text and you can, your daughter you can pick her up from a party. And I'm like, and here I am, social media and talking to you. I'm just unrecognizable. Sorry. I'm unrecognizable to myself. And honestly, that's part of the alchemy, is you stop hiding from yourself.
Yep.
As you just stop hiding from your gifts, your beauty, your value. And that's one of the beautiful gifts of committing to the healing pathway, is all these other expressions, whatever they are for your listeners, right? It's like whoever might be watching this, what is that for you, right? It just happened, for me, it happens to be these books and essays and, being now a columnist for Sacred Stories and a columnist for Biz Catalyst 360, which I'm honored by both of those opportunities more than you can even imagine, right? It's just beautiful because it is. It's about space. It's about decluttering. It's about finding that balance and harmony. I mean, it's the Libra in me, right? I want Mother Nature. Feng Shui is based in the balance and harmony with the world, with Mother Nature. And so when it goes out of wonky, out of balance, and we're just kind of raping Mother Earth, not only do we need to stop raping women hugely, but let's stop raping Mother Earth, and honoring the divine goddess that's within the earth, and honoring the trees and the water and the things that in the interconnected web of existence. This is what keeps us all here and breathing and falling in love with being alive, and I guess that's part of why I do what I do, is, oh my gosh, and I'm sure you feel this way too on some level, but it's like I want everybody to fall in love with being alive. Like, I have fallen in love with being alive, even when it's broken my heart, right? Even when the pets died and the cat died 3 weeks ago, and and the grief love place, right? But I'm still like, okay, but I know how to cry, and I love that I can cry, because it means I'm alive, I'm here and I can cry and I can express and I can be fully whole. Laura, I know that's my name, but it's like I can be passionate joy, and I can continue to create, because creativity is unlimited. It's unlimited, Haas. What's possible is just unlimited. And I kind of, I think when I first heard that, I was like, wow, and yet I'm in the experience of every day words come. And I just, the poem comes. I see something outside. It's so beautiful. I'm inspired, and I'm writing and tapping away, or getting out the pen, pad of paper, and pouring it out of me. And hopefully, it's touching and inspiring somebody to feel and to to connect with that part of them that wants to be this alive.
You're unpacking yourself as your birthday gift. It sounds like on the eve of your birthday, saying you're unrecognizable. For those that don't know, Feng Shui, much like yoga, is only one of the many arms of the ancient Vedic system. Feng Shui is one of the many arms of the traditional Chinese mystical tradition, which those two traditions, Indian and Chinese, are the two pillars of most of the modern Western anything, occult, secret societies, mystical schools, you name it, those are the two. So she's talking about the Chinese mystical traditions. And it sounds to me like, given the timeline, if I piece it together correctly, as you started to declutter your inner healing, we'll call it your inner Feng Shui, what I do, the inner alchemy, then you have these transformational experiences to be a more open channel. Or what I've come to learn is we're all becoming our own medicine. And it brings us back to this notion of sometimes in sharing the story, you really do wake up other people. You give permission to other people. So there's two quotes in my handy dandy quotes that came to mind as you were saying this last part about how coming to life and crying and all this. And so bear with me, and then what you want to leave behind and all of that, what you said. because one of them, and I'm intending to find the author, it's in here somewhere, is many a time, I don't have the name and I can find it if I can. Is many a time I've seen a man, they say man or woman, wanting to weep, instead beating their heart into submission. So I think that there is a lot of wisdom there and a lot of resurrecting that life, that soulfulness in what you're saying. And then the other quote is by a teacher of my own, and many may have heard of Yogananda and Self-Realization Fellowship, where I, again, very brilliantly put, as a servant leader, however you want to, define yourself, Laura. Let me pull this because I went by this Yogananda quote. And Yogananda goes on to say what he hopes his legacy to be in this regard. And bear with me, everybody. Let me pull up Mr. Yogananda's quote real quickly. Bear with me. I usually have them prepared, those that know me. So here you go, unplanned. Boom, boom, boom. Here we go. Coming down here. When I am gone, only love can take my place. Be so drunk with the love of God that you will know nothing, only God, and give that love to all. Paramahansa Yogananda. So that first quote, when you started to cry, I said, and you said it's all about life. Even if I'm crying is life. And I also thought about a quote that I read in one of the episodes, maybe with Tanya, who I've alluded to earlier, about Rumi. Dance in the fighting, dance in the blood, dance when you're weeping. All three quotes really hit on this point that as you cleared out as a leader, you call it Feng Shui, and because the energy of your space is a reflection of the energy of your inner space, it's beautifully articulated that then you had more capacity, more space to be able to be a bigger channel. And it's, I think you articulate and show and demonstrate really clearly to the audience that it doesn't have to have a certain form right away, or as you put it, creative expression is unlimited, because you become a vessel and whatever's supposed to come through. And I think that's what you're doing. I mean, in this show already, very potent transmission and giving a lot of permission, that your story, sharing your story, if you're listening, maybe as simple as sharing your story, then creates this butterfly effect, this domino chain of effect. So happy birthday, Eve. When you're gone, and you already alluded to your legacy, is there anything else? Because I think inadvertently or organically, I should say, you kind of said what you want to be known for, this notion of you want people to feel life, and the writing and all of that ignites that, and the opportunities you have through these various channels, as you articulated. Anything else that Laura, whether it be stating it through a vision you have for the earth, in terms of what do you want to be known for when you leave?
Oh, that she guided people to land in their hearts and interconnected web of love and existence. And to live, and I think another piece of that too is to live true to who you are and why you're here. Like the real deal, not the scripts. You can shred the scripts.
It's safe to shred the scripts.
Yes. Yeah.
How ironic or synchronistic that what you do for people for a living, you've inadvertently done for us on this episode, in terms of what you articulated before we hit record, this notion of finding the box in the back of your closet, or as I wrote it down, finding the buried treasure that's the real you. In a way, you've given us all this permission to be the leader we're here to be, in whatever creative expression it looks like for us. So very beautiful. Anything else that you feel inspired to share? Anything else before we wrap up for the audience?
I would also say this, because sometimes we have creative expression kind of like, oh, it's writing or it's dancing, but actually create your life, right? Like creativity is creating your life with every choice that you make that comes from your heart, that love inspired next right choice. And I often ask myself, what would love do now? And who would love be right now? And
LD. What would love do? The J-man is important too. What would Jesus do? And then LD. What would love do? I love that you flushed that out, Laura. That's really brilliantly put, that to also apply creation to life. And then you remind me of another quote. So here it is, which is by Master Bruce Lee, a fellow Sagittarius. So here, let me pull this up here. because this one literally, and I believe he said this on quite a few occasions. And then another, I got to find the quote. I know it's in here. It's this notion of, I believe he paraphrasing it real quick, and I don't want to, here it is. No, it's another quote. So it's in my list, and I don't want to waste time. So it's a paraphrase. Bruce Lee says something along the lines of, my intention, my legacy, what I want to be known for is to have been an artist of life. And so I think that goes to your point of apply creation to being a conscious co-creator of your life. A lot of wisdom here, Laura, a lot of wisdom. I mean, it makes sense that Dr. Laura Staley would bust out so much multidimensional wisdom on this, the eve of her birthday. Here it is. Here's what he said. I found it. Above all, I am hoping to actualize myself to be an artist of life along the way. Before this, he goes on to say, or before this, he says something along the lines in this essay, recognize and use the spiritual power of the infinite. So this goes to Laura's point of creative expression is unlimited. Recognize and use the spiritual power of the infinite. The intangible represents the real power of the universe. It is the seed of the tangible. It is the living void because all forms come out of it. And whoever realizes the void is filled with life and power and the love of all beings comes to life. So I think that goes to your point very astutely, to say that, you know, you got to bring that life out of you by decluttering, or what I call alchemizing.
Absolutely.
Well, Laura, you are a doll. I'm really grateful, Soul Sister, that we got a chance to share the space. And thank you for each of you, as Laura has demonstrated through a very candid, very raw episode of very potent wisdom interlaced with her experience healing from trauma, overcoming adversity, reigniting creativity, you know, transcending what it means to be a leader, defying the odds. So much there. We hope that at the end you realize you now have the permission to be the leader you came here to be, whatever that micro movement is, as Laura put it, whatever it may be. Take that movement one step at a time, and the path will continue to unclutter itself. As always, we thank you for joining us. If this message resonated with you, share it, because as you heard from Laura and as you've heard from me, we have a collective mission, a collective intention to be of service to other leaders. So you can do your part in supporting and sharing this wisdom, sharing this episode, and letting others know and bask in these opportunities to not only cherish themselves, cherish their life, to cherish the gift that they are here to be. Laura, thank you, thank you, thank you. Happy birthday, Eve. Thank you for being a gift to us and unwrapping yourself. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to each of you. Until next time, we'll see you back here for the Vulnerable Power Show. Love, blessings, and passionate joy your way.